So in this video, I'm going to talk about how to answer the question around your weaknesses. And I think a lot of people struggle with weaknesses because, we don't really want to be openly disclosing something that we think is going to rule us out of getting the job. And likewise, we don't want to say something that's so trivial, people will think we're not taking the question seriously. So it's about kind of finding that middle ground of being open and honest, and also showing that we have learned, we have grown, we are self-aware, and we are working on things. So the reason why people ask a question around your weaknesses is a couple of things. So one of them is, is there any red flags? So if you are an accountant and you ask someone a weakness and they say they're not very good with numbers, obviously that's going to be a bit of an issue. So the reason people ask about weaknesses is to identify those red flags and also see that someone has developed self-awareness. So how would I answer this question? You can answer it a couple of ways. One of the ways you can answer it is you can reflect back on the past. So for example, you might sort of say, in the past, I was someone that in the past, I recognized that I'm very detail focused, and often I would double check, triple check, quadruple check reports. And what I noticed happening was sometimes I was very dangerously close to missing deadlines. I always got there just in the end, but it was quite a lot of pressure to actually do that. So what I actually did was I implemented a system whereby I would get one person to check it and then I would move on. And or I would just before it was due, I would get some feedback from someone. Just, can you quickly have a look at this? And then I kind of go from there. And what I learned over time was to really trust my instincts, and just to kind of recognize that when I did it the first time, it was usually right, and the feedback was pretty minimal, so it probably didn't warrant slowing down the different processes. And what I actually did after that was I actively sought feedback from other people about my reports. Well in advance, before they were due, I would do up a bit of a draft, maybe a couple of days before the due date, and then get someone to check it so that it wouldn't have a bottleneck towards the end of the process. And I think that's one example of where I recognized something that I wasn't really strong at, and I kind of work through it. And that's my typical approach to weaknesses. I identify it, I acknowledge it, I look at what are the ways that I can address it, and then I go and do it. And then as part of that, to make sure I'm doing it and it doesn't impact on other people, I do get feedback and take feedback to continually improve. Okay, that was just off the top of my head. So that would be one example of feedback. You basically taking it to the past and saying what you actually did. Another approach you could take is where you take ownership of the question. So you might sort of say, they might say something like, so tell me one of your weaknesses, or give me some examples of some of your weaknesses. You might sort of say, look, strengths and weaknesses are all about context. Context meaning, a strength in one situation might be a weakness in another. And let me give you an example. So an example of one of my strengths is I'm really creative and outside the box. So I like to come up with very creative solutions, and people often say to me that's one of my best strengths. And in most cases, that's actually really beneficial, when there's new projects and there's generating a lot of energy and people want to improve a system or process, for example. Coming up with new ideas is something that's really, really valuable. But there are times when that may be seen as a weakness, when there's a lot of time pressures, for example, or there are strict ways of actually having to do things, and you don't have that flexibility. Coming up with new ideas can actually sort of slow things down. So for me, it's less about strengths and weaknesses. And for me, it's about what's the right time and the not so right time. And for me, I always ask people, try to get feedback and sort of say, well, I've got lots of ideas here. As you know, I'm an ideas person. Is now a good time to mention some of those ideas, or would you like me to hold them back and another time might be better? So I actually invite people into the process to get a sense from them where I can apply those particular strengths. So feedback is a really critical part of that loop. So feedback for me is actively seeking feedback from other people so that I can grow and improve, because that's really what I'm about. I'm about being the best version of myself in any job. So I'm really looking forward to joining your organization so you can see some of those strengths that I have and can definitely add value to this position. So that would be like one example that you could use. So in summary, you know, you can look at it from the past, what specifically you actually did. You can, you know, take ownership of the question and talk about it in terms of context. So your strengths and weaknesses really depend on the situation, which is really true. There's other options that you can do, which other videos capture, which are things like, you know, saying something that's kind of like not really a weakness. So it's more like a quirk, like, oh, you know, I'm a bit wacky sometimes about the way I dress, or, you know, I mean, you could do those sorts of things, but most of the time people are kind of like, yeah, cool, yeah, whatever, write it down. Whereas what people are really after, I mean, listen to the responses that I provided, and if you heard those, would you think, oh, that's something that's really valuable? Also, you want to be avoiding mentioning things that can't be changed. Okay, so with my examples of coming up with ideas, they were really easily able to be modified. I could come up with an idea or not come up with an idea. I could come up with a big idea or maybe a smaller idea. You don't want to be mentioning something that's unfixable, like I'm very black or white about the way I see something, and I'm really firm on that opinion. You know, passion is great, but being so firm on something, it kind of indicates to people that you're not that flexible. And most of the time employees like you to be flexible because you never know. They never know what's happening in the past. So the most valuable employees are the ones that are agile, the ones that can move through certain things. You don't also want to be pointing out health things as a particular weakness, or openly disclosing things that can be seen as a red flag. Open honesty is great. Disclosure is good if you need to disclose based on you have a particular reasonable adjustment, that's fine. But you want to be asking yourself the question, does it add value to the position? And if it doesn't, you know, you probably want to be cautious about what you do and don't disclose. But if you'd like me to do a video on that, I can. So there are some of my thoughts on weaknesses. If you don't know what your weakness is, that's okay. Other people will really clearly be able to tell you most of the time, once you ask them permission. So you could ask people, you know, what are the things that you'd like to see me start doing? What are some of the things you'd like to see me stop doing? What are some of the things you'd like me to keep doing? That's an example of a strength. How do you think I'm perceived in this organization? So there's some of the questions that you could ask someone as well. And often other people will be, once invited and know that they know it's a safe space, they'll be really easily able to give you specific feedback. All right, so I hope you enjoyed that. If you did enjoy this content, like and subscribe. It does make a big difference, I think. And thank you so much. All right, see you later. Bye-bye now.